Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Have you ever heard of the frog in a pot metaphor? Yeah, of course you have. It goes something like this. If you place a frog in a pot of water and then turn up the temperature of the water really quick, well, it will jump out of the pot. But if you turn up the temperature slowly, the frog will eventually boil to death. Yeah. Well, this metaphor is often, of course, used for, showing human behavior and things. For instance, if you just take human rights away from people all of a sudden, well, they get upset. But if you do it slowly, well, it can be done. The problem with this metaphor is that it's not true when it comes to the frog. Scientific experiments have shown that frogs will try to escape when the water temperature rises, even gradually. So why do people believe the frog in a pot theory? Well, it's because it's communicated so often that eventually people believe that it's true, even though it's not. We are seeing that in our political arena today. Leaders on the left are crying to anyone who will listen that they think that Trump is a Nazi and ICE are the Gestapo. Here is a montage, for instance, it was put together by the Daily Wire, and it's of leftists like Governor Tim Walz, Mayor of Boston Michelle Wu, Mayor of L.A. Karen Bass, New York Representative Dan Goldman is in here, AOC of New York, even Eddie Glaude, who's Glaude of MSNBC, and lastly, you'll hear Representative Stephen Lynch. Here, take a listen.
Donald Trump's modern-day Gestapo is scooping folks up off the streets. They're in unmarked vans, wearing masks, being shipped off to foreign torture dungeons. No chance to mount a defense, not even a chance to kiss a loved one goodbye.
I don't know of any police department that routinely wears masks. We know that there are other groups that routinely wear masks.
It's felt like we're part of a grand experiment. What happens? How far will the public tolerate the federal government intervening and seizing power from a governor?
The combination of these Gestapo-like tactics with the fact that these are nonviolent, non-criminal immigrants doing things the right way.
I mean, in that last facility, I was not safe from the officers in that facility.
But when the nation, when these political factions divided the nation in between slaveholders and slave catchers, when they made everybody with the fugitive slave law, all of us had to, if someone escaped, all of us had to return that particular piece of property to these folk. With ICE running around LA, forcing people to make choices, will they protect their friends, their neighbors, their family members?
You know, my dad served in Second World War. He fought the Nazis in Northern Africa. He fought the Nazis on the Italian Peninsula. And I think he's looking down right now and he's happy that I'm fighting today's Nazis.
That's crazy, right? Well, the Daily Wire also reports that Democratic voters are demanding, get this, that their representatives prepare for violence to protect democracy from President Donald Trump, saying that there needs to be blood to get the public's attention. This is according to a new report. Axios reported Monday that Democratic lawmakers are being told by their supporters that they are not doing enough to combat Trump and that they should support violent forms of political agitation. House lawmakers told the outlet that they have heard calls to storm the White House and be prepared to get shot. One House Democrat said some supporters have suggested that what they really need to do is be willing to get shot during visits to ICE detention centers. Quote, "Our own base is telling us that what we're doing is not good enough. that there needs to be blood to grab the attention of the press and the public. That's what one lawmaker added. One lawmaker suggested that the calls for them to be arrested or victims of violence were racially insensitive. Quote, "What I have seen is a demand that we get ourselves arrested intentionally or allow ourselves to be victims of violence. And a lot of times that's coming from economically very secure white people," the lawmaker said. He went on to say that the expectations aren't just unreal, they're dangerous. The calls come as some lawmakers have been arrested or detained while agitating against immigration enforcement. Like the incidents range from California Senator Alex Padilla being briefly detained after an interruption, after he interrupted a press conference hosted by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. In the incident, in the indictment against Representative Lamona MacGyver for a scuffle outside of New Jersey ICE facility. Another lawmaker told Axios that people online have sent me crazy stuff, told me to storm the White House and stuff like that, while a different one was told that civility isn't working and that Democrats need to be ready for violence to fight to protect our democracy. One lawmaker said that calls for action were just simply getting out of control. Quote, "It's like the Roman Colosseum. People just want more and more of this spectacle," the lawmaker said. Multiple lawmakers said that their supporters expressed frustration about them following traditional norms. Quote, "We've got people who are desperately wanting us to do something. No matter what we say, they want more." That actually came from Representative Brad Schneider. He's a Democrat from Illinois. The article was published just hours before a gunman was killed in McAllen, Texas, after he opened fire on multiple border patrol agents. The Trump administration said the attack was an ambush targeted at federal agents. And get this, in recent weeks, Homeland Security has said that it has seen a 700% increase. I'm going to repeat that again. That Homeland Security has seen a 700% increase in assaults targeting ICE agents compared to this time last year, while some have called for federal agents to stop wearing masks to shield their identity. And speaking of leftist violent ambushes in Texas, the Daily Wire goes on to report that 11 people have been arrested in what law enforcement described as a planned ambush of corrections officers at the ICE detention facility in Alvarado, Texas on July 4th. One Alvarado police officer was shot in the neck during the attack and is expected to survive. But, quote, "Early reports indicate that more than a dozen masked individuals dressed in black arrived at the Prairieland ICE detention facility late Friday night and vandalized vehicles and security cameras in the parking lot." This is what CBS News reported. They said that the individuals launched fireworks in an apparent effort to lure law enforcement. On July 5th, the very next day, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche posted on X, quote, "We are closely monitoring the attacks on DHS detention facility in Prairieland, Texas, and Portland, Oregon, and are coordinating with the USAOs and our law enforcement partners. The department has zero tolerance for assaults on federal officers or property and will bring the full weight of the law against those responsible." On Monday, acting U.S. Attorney Nancy Larson stated, quote, "We're here to tell you that late at night on July 4th, Friday night at apparently 10:37 p.m. at the Prairieland ICE Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas, 10 to 12 individuals dressed in black, military-style clothing began shooting fireworks and engaging in acts of vandalism at the facility. And this was part of an organized attack. Today, my office has charged 10 individuals with 3 counts of attempted murder of a federal officer. This is what she said. And she continues by saying, each of the 10 are also charged with 3 counts of discharging a firearm in relation to a crime of violence. Each of these defendants faces a mandatory prison term of 10 years and up to life in prison. An additional co-conspirator was charged with an obstruction of justice and conspiracy for attempting to conceal and destroy evidence in relation to the attack, and he faces up to 10 years in prison as well. This is what she says. She says, let's discuss the incident. It was a planned ambush with the intent to kill ICE corrections officers. Make no mistake. This was not a so-called peaceful protest. It was indeed an ambush. And I would agree. I mean, and this is just another example of the growing violent left movement in this country. I liked an article by Jesus Mesa. He's the politics reporter for Newsweek. I don't necessarily I'm not going to share the whole article with you. It's a little bit long, but and I don't agree with it all, because he tends to do what a lot of liberal reporters do and start to blame those that are not responsible for what is happening here. Blame the victim for what's happening. But I did like a little bit about what he was having to say about the violent left and the growing movement there. He said at a recent protest in Midtown Manhattan, one of many against Donald Trump's administration, a pair of masked women stood quietly in front of the stone lions that loom over the New York Public Library. A life-size cutout of Luigi Mangoni propped between them. Yeah. No one seemed to mind as chants against authoritarianism echoed down Fifth Avenue and homemade signs called for due process and migrant rights. Mangione effigy stood unchallenged. Just another figure in one particular demonstration's crowded landscape. Well, Mangione, of course, he's 26. He's charged with shooting and killing the United Health CEO Brian Thompson in a targeted attack last December. And he remains something of an enigma more than 6 months since he was arrested in Pennsylvania in connection with Thompson's murder. His political views, or what are known of them, are contrary if not incoherent. He was the highly educated scion of a well-off Baltimore family who had no obvious beef with the capitalistic system in which he benefited. And Mangione wrote about his chronic back injury, but he was never insured by United Health. Well, none of that has stopped a left-wing activist movement from embracing him and co-opting his image as a vigilante fighting against the perceived wrongs of the American healthcare system. In today's fractured political climate, such selective silence is becoming increasingly common. So let's talk about the assassination culture. He says, while right-wing extremism is regularly dissented and dissected and denounced in mainstream media, conservatives have long complained that political violence from the left regularly receives less scrutiny or is reframed entirely to dismiss the perpetrator's progressive views. This perceived imbalance has fueled a growing belief, often discussed on conservative subreddits, in right-leaning Substacks, and on X, that left-wing violence is minimized or rationalized, while right-wing violence is amplified and condemned. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think that's debatable. Do you? He goes on to say the Network Contagion Research Institute, or NCRI for short, is a nonpartisan organization that studies the spread of hate, manipulation, and extremism across digital platforms, and has raised these concerns recently. Based at Rutgers University, the group uses machine learning and data and analytics to identify emerging threats and ideological patterns online. Quote, we're witnessing the alarming rise of what the NCRI calls an assassination culture. That's what Max Horder said of the he's of the NCRI, and he said this in a Newsweek interview. Quote, violence targeting figures like Donald Trump or Elon Musk have gone beyond normalization. It's being sacrificed as resistance by parts of the political left. That once theoretical threat turned very real last July in Butler, Pennsylvania, when Donald Trump was nearly killed in the middle of a campaign rally by a lone gunman perched on a nearby rooftop. The near miss shocked the country, but polling showed sharp partisan divides, even in the case of the near assassination of a political candidate. A YouGov survey conducted shortly after found that 54% of U.S. adults said Donald Trump deserved sympathy. Among Democrats, only 31% agreed, while 60% said he did not. In contrast, 83% of Republicans expressed sympathy for the then candidate, reflecting how politics shapes responses to violence. 2 months later, another attempt on Trump's life took place at the Florida Golf Club. I guess he was trying to turn it into a gun club. A poll of 1,000 registered voters by Scott Rasmussen's Napoleon News Institute found that 17% said it would have been better for the country if Trump had died. Now, get this. Among Democrats, the number was 28%. 28% said it would have been better off if he had died. Quote, for decades, we've assumed that calls for political violence come from the far right, and often they do, whatever. What we never expected was the enormous growth in similar calls coming from the mainstream left, Horder said. Both of the men who police say came close to killing Trump last summer also shared something in common with Mangione. Political worldviews that ranged between muddled and contradictory. For instance, Thomas Crooks, he was the 20-year-old who was shot dead by Secret Service snipers moments after his bullet grazed Trump's ear in Butler. Well, he left virtually no online footprint. He was a registered Republican who donated to Democrats on the day that Joe Biden was inaugurated. Ryan Routh, he's 59, who he's accused of lying in wait for Trump in the bushes as he played around a golf, was a self-proclaimed Trump voter who had grown disillusioned over the war in Ukraine. And he also expressed support for Bernie Sanders. He definitely was a big Bernie Sanders supporter. The NCRI rose to prominence in recent years due to its persistent early warnings about far-right radicalization, as they put it, including the growth of QAnon conspiracy theory and the rise of political violence leading up to the certification of the election of January 6th of 2021. Joel Frankenstein, co-founder of NCRI, recalled in an interview with Newsweek, quote, they weren't an accident. They didn't come out of nowhere. They were inevitable. Now, let me stop here for a second. Again, I told you I don't agree. I mean, this is a Newsweek article, right? But January 6th riot was not a violent one, unless you call the shooting to death of a rioter by Capitol Police violent. And maybe you might have a point. But other than that, it was not a violent one. Okay? Now, the group is raising similar concerns, he says, this time about rhetoric emerging from the opposite end of the political spectrum. These aren't fringe beliefs anymore, the group warns. They're creeping into the mainstream of activist discourse. A recent survey conducted by the NCRI found that nearly 1/3 of respondents expressed some level of justification for acts of lethal political violence, with significantly higher support among those identifying as left of center. So get this, 56%, over half of those respondents said murdering Donald Trump would be at least somewhat justified, while 50% said the same of Elon Musk. The poll also found that 40% of all respondents believe it was at least somewhat acceptable to destroy a Tesla dealership in protest of Musk's partnership with Trump, with support rising to nearly 60% among those who identify as left of center. So you're talking almost 2/3 believed it was okay to burn down a Tesla dealership. Well, NCRI's analysis, based on troves of social media data, reveals high fringe internet culture has helped build what the group calls permission structures for violence. These are social environments, online or offline, where violent acts are no longer condemned by they're no longer condemned, but tactically accepted, if not outright encouraged, actually. Quote, "It's not just about who pulls the trigger," said Frankenstein. It's about who stays silent, who reposts a meme, who says nothing when someone jokes about killing a billionaire. That's how the corridor to violence gets built. The imagery and memification of Luigi Mangione is just one such example. Mangione, currently jailed pending his capital murder trial, has become an anti-hero in niche online communities. I would even say, well, I mean, even in celebrity circles and elsewhere. His likeness is shared alongside memes depicting Nintendo's Luigi character as a stylized assassin, ironic, cartoonish, but deadly serious. Quote, "It looks like a joke," Horder said, linking Mangione's online fame to a pattern of other real-world instances, including the recent firebombing of elderly Jewish protesters in Boulder, Colorado, allegedly by an Egyptian national angry about the war in Gaza. Quote, "But it's not. It's a method of radicalization wrapped up in humor." Quote, "They were acting within a worldview that told them these killings would be celebrated, and online they were. Gaza, the Gaza conflict has actually started to even spill over into what we're talking about here. Just days before the anti-Semitic attack on border or in border, 2 Israeli embassy staffers were gunned down outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. in a targeted attack that resembled the style of the ambush on Thompson. According to law enforcement, the suspected gunman, Elias Rodriguez, stalked the 2 young diplomats after they departed an event, and upon arrest told the officers, "I did it for Palestine. I did it for Gaza." This is a quote, "This targeting and outright murder of 2 people is very much an escalation from the traditional left-aligned protest tactics, said Catherine Keneally, director of threat analysis at the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. It's a nonprofit that monitors extremism and terrorism. And she said this to NPR. She says, trends are changing. And since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th of 2023, killing some 1,200 Israelis and others, including U.S. citizens, I will add, and taking hundreds more captive, at least 5 deaths in the U.S. have been linked to the Palestine conflict. Experts told NPR that the war between Israel and Hamas has changed the tone of some left-wing protests, making the red lines less clear. On college campuses across the U.S., protests against Israel have waxed and waned, and some activists have been criticized for spreading messages seen as anti-Semitic. Well, they're not just seen as anti-Semitic, they are anti-Semitic, or just outright supportive of military groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Quote, left-wing extremism is often overlooked, in part because the worst state abuses and non-state violence associated with proponents of communist and socialist ideologies happened several decades ago, said Jacob Gurl. He's a director of policy and research at the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. Quote, some actors on the border far left continue to carry out or support acts of political violence and terrorism, he added. Rodriguez, who is accused of killing the young Israeli diplomats, shared social media posts praising Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, evidence, researchers say, of a growing wave of pro-Hamas or pro-terrorist sentiment among a small but outspoken group of Gaza-focused activists. This according to reports. Rodriguez also spoke admirably of Mangione in posts unearthed by law enforcement. So the threats flagged by researchers, online radicalization, meme culture, and the normalization of violence as a means of justifying a political end are increasingly shaping public discourse well beyond the digital sphere. Peter Lurchin, he's a University of Connecticut professor and leading theorist of structural demographic cycles, sees the current movement as part of a predictable historical pattern, he says. Quote, in 2010, a period of political instability began in the 2020s. Turkin told Newsweek that nearly every warning sign, particular immersion, elite overproduction, eroding state capacity, has only intensified. While political violence has increased across ideological lines, Turchin said that the public perception of media coverage remain uneven. Right-wing, this is his quote, right-wing violence is emphasized by mainstream media because it's perceived as an existential threat to the ruling regime, he said. Whereas left-wing violence is often seen as less threatening, sometimes even as a counterweight to the right. And he's right about that. According to Lurchin, the perception gap is no accident. Quote, narratives around political violence are shaped not just by the acts themselves, but by the stories that elites and counter-elites build around them. Both he and Horder agreed that instances of political violence, whether they come from, perpetuate a cycle in which each side accuses the other of hypocrisy while accusing the bad actors of their own extremes. Again, I don't think you can say this is a, both of them are bad type scenario here. The violence is coming from the left, and it is definitely something that is, I don't want to say being overlooked, because I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think what's happening is that it's being excused away if it's leftist who is coming in and saying and perpetuating violence or saying, calling for violence or whatever. But if there is some right-wing violence, then that is a result of what Donald Trump is saying or all this different stuff. So they're handled in two entirely different ways by the mainstream media. I also said, quote, people talk about radicalization like it's something that happens in dark corners of the internet. This is what Horder said from NCIR. He said, but it happens on the streets now too, in broad daylight, sometimes behind banners of justice. Yeah, it couldn't be more accurate there, right? And I'll say this: all we hear from the prior administration, and all we heard of during their time in office, was that right-wing extremists were the nation's biggest threats. Yet, quite the opposite is true. I mean, this is a very overused tactic of the left. Accuse your enemies of what you're doing in order to not draw attention to what you're doing. And my advice to liberal leftist leaders: if you stoke a fire, it's likely to consume you. And I think that's what we're starting to see happen. I don't know. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong. But I would love to hear from you on it. And, of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Go on to YouTube. We'd love to have you like and share. It definitely helps us out. And thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.